Hello.
Hello, Stephanie.
It's a very special day today,
It
isn't it,
is.
Jill?
It's a very special day, and it's a special time. It feels kind of weird to be here at 7,
I'm not going to complain, honestly. I start to wind down when it gets too late.
but we're not alone, are we?
We are not alone. We have somebody very special here, and I looked at the stats, and your adoring public is here, Mary Kay. We've got viewers. So yes, we are so pleased to have our friend Mary Kay Waldvogel here to talk about soft covers for hard times. And we just thank you so much for coming and talking. We've had such a great time reading the book,
It
and
was
I know people
fantastic.
are, yeah, excited to hear from you about writing the book and any other tidbits you want to share.
That's what people hear for the most are the tidbits.
Okay.
So I'm not going to waste any time with announcements. That can be left for social media and for our next week's video, which is a free night. So there won't be any reading. We won't waste time. We'll get right into this.
Yeah, we
Take
want
it
to jump
away,
right
Steph.
into, yeah, the action packed. Well, my too many screens, too many screens.
Well, I
Um,
just want to thank you for doing this because it's really given me an opportunity to look back. I had no idea. It's like 35 years. I mean, I remember when I was of a certain age and I said, I'm not going to live past 30, and here I am with this 35 years since it's like another life. But anyway, and it's fun to get your perspective on it. I've been listening the last 3 weeks, and I hope everybody goes back and listens to those because they're great.
Well, and those were really fun too, getting your live perspective on our live perspective and adding in some of that additional context that was
Mhm.
really great. And like your notes were super helpful in
yeah.
kind of seeing where your brain was at during
Mhm.
during some of this process. I feel
Mhm.
like that some of that stuff really gets lost when we're reading
Mhm.
books. And I'm
Mhm.
totally one of those people that thinks about those weird questions about like, what was this like for the author?
Mhm.
Mhm.
You
And now
know,
you get to talk to one. Yeah.
yeah. And that, well, and that was
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
part of Steph and
Right.
I
Yeah.
kind of being like, maybe let's do this interview thing with people to kind of
Uh-huh.
get some of that, behind the scenes context.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that should just be like the big word now, like context of all the
Context.
things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Well, why don't we just dive in? You were so kind as to respond to our questions already. So we kind
Mhm.
of know, where you want to go with this. But, if you could just start, you had written a
Mhm.
book before this,
Uh-huh.
and, we're really curious about, this was a solo project for you. So
Right.
you could just briefly talk about, like,
Mhm.
diving into this
Mhm.
coming from the book you wrote with Bets.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, at the time, I was a English as a second language teacher at the University of Tennessee. These were university level people, so they were writing essays, and I was teaching people how to write, thesis, support, research, da da da. So, and I had, I had a good background in writing. But here was my interest in quilts, and I thought, and I'd done the quilt survey with Bets Ramsey, and then we wrote that book together. And the Quilts of Tennessee and Rutledge Hill Press. You kept forgetting Hill. It's Rutledge Hill Press in Nashville. Was just founded in 1986, and the owner's mother in Chattanooga knew Betts, and she highly recommended that they take us on. So we started with a publisher, and we had this model of quilt digest, this incredible photography. We wanted that level of book. So anyway, the first one went really well. And then Betts wrote a book again for Rutledge Hill, and it's a softcover book called, it's a pattern book. And she included a lot of stories. She was doing a column. And so the book is the stories and then the quilt pattern. So what I realized when we did the Quilts of Tennessee and we were trying to pick the quilts for the book, we had a cutoff date of 1930 because
Right.
honestly, people thought 30s quilts were boring, including me. I mean, I'd probably been collecting for 10 years and I thought nobody wants 20th century quilts. But I realized that if we were going to do quilt interviews, and we ran into these people, in the quilts of Tennessee, they were telling stories about their grandparents from 30 years earlier. Well, why not ask the people, are right there who have made the 30s quilts. So the Knoxville Museum of Art opened in 1990, and the museum wanted some splashy exhibit that they could travel around the country. And Bets and I had traveled Quilts of Tennessee around the state of Tennessee. So anyway, I said, okay. And they said, why don't you write a book about the 30s? Because that's kind of related to Tennessee. And I thought, okay, here's an opportunity, got a publisher, got a museum behind us. They're going to pay for this. They're going to do that, da, 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 da. So I went ahead and did it. And I was teaching at the same time. It was a lot going on. But anyway,
I
decided I'm from Missouri. You got to show me. I wanted authentic, accurate stuff. By this time, I was a member of AQSG, and boy, that was the name of the game. No myths. We wanted to get the truth. So I decided.
You had already written a paper for AQSG at that point. At least one, I know.
At least one, yes. The WPA quilt and the, I think the Lindsay one too.
Mm-hmm.
But, those aren't, well, WPA is 30s. So it kind of got me into it. So anyway, I decided the only way I could do this was to interview people and use ephemera, things it was called the box under the bed. Every time I'd go interview one of these women, they'd pull something out, with all of their templates. They're made from cereal boxes and then there were those clippings, like the Laura Wheeler clippings. I had never seen these before. And so I decided that if somebody could show me a quilt, show me their stuff that they used to make it, and provide a photo, preferably one of the 30s when they were making the quilt. They were in the book. So I ended up getting some great stories. So,
it's so funny that you say, people were really didn't care so much about 20th century quilts. I think, the 30s obviously have become a lot, more interesting to people. And, I think books like yours, I know have fueled that. I kind of grew up with my mom quilting and she loved the 30s. She was very drawn to it. But I feel like we're kind of hearing the same thing about like the quilts from the 70s.
Yes.
And, it's like, that's not ancient history. We're not interested in that. So it's interesting to see, like, you kind of see these things sort of repeating themselves throughout the decades. So I hope to follow in your shoes.
Yeah, well, it's great to be able to have people following it. You're not the only one who's following in some of these tracks, and it's really exciting to see that happen. So I remember how hard it was to get to things like the newspapers. I remember thinking, whoa, if there's a Laura Wheeler pattern, I've seen 2 or 3 in this quilt maker's box. There must be others, and then I'd go to a library and I'd have to go through these microfilms over and over and over again. I mean, and then I'd run into Nancy Page and then I'd realize, oh my gosh, they've got competing columns in the same newspaper. And then I began to think that this is a way to sell the newspapers, and there's marketing going on here. And then in the course of doing that, you see pictures of women who won prizes with their quilts. And this became to me, the most accurate information about the 30s. And so the book is pretty much focused on what I was able to reach, which is the Southeast. And I also felt like the Southeast had been neglected and people really hadn't looked at it very well. So I felt like I was doing something, something that would add to quilt history. And in doing it, though, it tied in with a bigger, with the nation. And I mean, I'm not sure. A lot of people were saying, oh, you're discovering regional characteristics here, like string quilts. You know what string quilts are?
Yes.
I think they're only in the Southeast, but boy, I've been told many times, oh, no. We had them in the Midwest. I said, okay. Well, anyway, and then another thing to remember is that I was a linguist in the beginning. I was a French major in undergrad and then a linguist. I'm fascinated with words. So when I heard a word like string, I wondered, what in the world does that mean? How are they using that word string in connection with quilts? And it came up in the Viola Webb interview that we're going to hear a little later. But she pretty much said to me, I said, string, she said it like that. And I said, string. And she said, honey, it's string. I said, okay, exactly. What is a string? I mean, that's string like on your gym shoes. No. It's just that little thing left, from making a dress, an apron or something, a little scrap. And you just put it in your bag and you get to it in the wintertime and you go to a quilter, you just do it. And, that's what's happening today. You see this interest. Nobody wants to throw away the tiniest piece, but nobody is calling it a string. But
Bonnie Hunter does.
Really?
I do a lot of Bonnie Hunter quilts, and
she still calls them string.
She does a lot of quote string piecing. She pieces them onto her foundation is phone book pages.
Perfect.
Yeah, because it's not like a newsprint. The ink won't lift. They're very thin. And she pieces on those till the cows come home and turn them into stuff. I don't have a picture of it right here right now, but my Straits of Mackinac quilt that is a pattern of hers does a lot of string piecing on it. So as soon as in your book I'm reading string piecing, I'm like, oh,
I know.
I do a lot of that myself.
No. But in the South, that was, I mean, if a Black person said she was making a string quilt, or this mountain woman making a string quilt, they knew what they were talking about. So there's a word that just hasn't gotten into the vernacular. I just think it's kind of a cool thing that it's centered so close in the quilt world. I keep saying, well, I've often said, you just can't make this stuff up. And that's the beauty of getting into quilt research, is you get these amazing stories and things you haven't even thought about. I mean, they're not picked up by the news or.
Sure. Yeah. I think so much of these stories are really appealing to me because they tell you so much. Like you're saying, you learn more things. It's the context around making the quilts. Sometimes the quilt story is just, well, we made quilts and these are the other things we did. And then sometimes there's like this really, I don't know, like really, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like just really engaging story.
Right.
We read like the quilters and, these people, pioneers basically, and living in dugouts, and, the quilts were not the really important part of the story, but they got us there. So it's so fascinating.
The story that, this is a little off, but Willie actually is one of the women that I talk to a lot. But she grew up in the Smokies. And she's the one who told me, she's the first one who used the word Lindsay. She said, honey, that's a Lindsay quilt, And she said, in the winter, my mom would put the two little girls in bed in the second floor, and they'd put all these quilts on top of them. And then the Lindsay quilt went on top. It was heavy. It held it all down. And then she said, some mornings we'd wake up and there'd be snow on the Lindsay quilt.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Like just like,
See,
oh.
that's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard that story from other people too. So,
Yeah.
or the time that Nora, I was interviewing, she's a Black woman, and she was saying it was for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. And that kind of is the thing that kind of led into the interest in doing these interviews for this book. And she said something about hanging her quilts out on the clothesline. And that she didn't want them to touch the ground, the dirt ground. And she said her mother was so proud of the swept front yard.
Oh, yeah.
Proud. Some people might have thought that was poverty. No, this is the pride of that swept front yard and the quilt hanging out there. I mean, I don't know, you just kind of think that you're blessed to be able to have this opportunity to get that close to them. And it's just a matter of putting a quilt in their lap and they begin telling these incredible stories. So.
And you can't get that. Like, I think folklorists, like Laurel Horton can get to the bottom of those stories. But I think a lot of times historians, they don't get that necessarily, just sitting down or they don't get the chance to sit down with the regular folk. It becomes too academic. So, yeah, I think quilts are such a great gateway to this kind of, these storytelling.
Well, and to jump off from you talking about hearing these stories and things like that, you had said in the notes that you were so nice to give to me and Steph before we started the book that you learned a lot about yourself while writing this book. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, suburb of St. Louis. Nice middle-class family, went to college. I was a Girl Scout. I learned how to sew. My mother did. I went to home ec class. I knitted. But this was 1965 when I went to college. And whoa, I mean, we still weren't supposed to be wearing jeans to dinner. Of course, no smoking. Well, you could smoke, but you couldn't stand up and go from one table to the other. Now, what kind of you came back to your dorm. Of course, there were only women, and you had to be in by a certain time, 10 o'clock, and you had to check in. I mean, it was anyway. I revolted against that whole thing. And a lot of women were. This was the time, and this was the women's. We just realized this is ridiculous, and although at the time when I came out of that college, it was either be a teacher, a nurse, or a social worker. And I went on to graduate school. And then, it's a mess with 68. It was the Vietnam War. So anyway, I wouldn't say I was a radical, but I was pretty hard. I was a protester. And I went back to Chicago to teach in the inner city. I was a union, I was the best job I ever had teaching because I was a union member. But anyway, and then in the middle of it, in Chicago, I suddenly got my own studio apartment, and I had enough money to do that. And I even went out and bought my own stereo for like $200. That was a lot of money.
Oh my gosh, yes.
and I had a loom. I bought a loom too. I was taking classes over here. And I thought, I want something above that loom. I had ferns hanging in the window. All of this was new, to even have plants inside the house. And anyway, so I went off one Saturday morning and I saw a quilt in the window of a store in Evanston. And I just walked right in there. I loved it. I walked right in there. I said, I want that quilt. I didn't care how much it cost, who made it, how old it was, none of that stuff. I was going to get it because I loved it, and I hung it on the wall. And it was artwork. It was a youth quilt. I love that. that Mary Fonz, it was a
Uh-huh.
used quilt. It was not meant for a bed. And it had a story to it. I've never figured out the whole thing, but that was the beginning. And I fell hook, line, and sinker for fabrics, women's studies, all of it tied in. And I met a man who was, Jerry loved, his mother was a quilt maker in Missouri, and he loved antiques. He would buy as many quilts as I was buying. And then we came to Tennessee. So here I am in Tennessee. Oh, the first job I had was with the Knoxville Women's Center. Wow. And we were getting women jobs, and we were fighting for ERA. I mean, and I was a new person in town, but they all anyway. So I wondered, and I decorated the walls of this women's center with quilts. And I thought, what is going on?
Wow. Now, where did you get those quilts?
They were mine.
Oh, okay.
I put them up. I had quilts. Our house right now has about 13 quilts on the walls. They're decorations, and I never tire of looking at them. So I stopped and I thought, what is going on? How can I be such a kind of a rabble rouser and be so taken with this kind of romantic art form? Mm-hmm. And I think through Soft Covers for Hard Times, I think I realized that I was not alone. I mean, there was something in the air in the 1930s that was relating to women who were going through this change. Quilts, well, it. You're shaking your heads. It was the lead up to the bicentennial, and there was a lot of interest in revising the historical record, and women were getting a chance to be involved in that. And through quilts, that was a way. And then it was also the Whitney show had already happened when I bought that quilt in Evanston. And here was a whole store, an antique quilt store in Evanston.
You had a whole store?
A whole store. It just closed a couple years ago.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, this is a major, on the line of America Hurrah. She knew those people in New York. And she's the one who told me, you got some good quilts here. Why don't you go on to New York? And I did. I took quilts to New York. I drug them into, this is a few years after I'd been here, but and so, I went into America Hurrah and all those other ones. And I said, I've got some quilts here. Would you like to buy some? They didn't know me from Adam. So they said no. But the interesting thing on one of them, I went down the steps, dragging this big bag of really nice big quilts. And a man was waiting for me out on the sidewalk. His arm was on the the parking meter. And he said, it's my wife's birthday tonight, and I want one of those quilts that you were showing that man.
Oh, wow.
Can't say I have any selling stories like that. Usually it's just Stephanie and I in the trunk of my car in a diner parking lot.
And this is the most amazing part. He looked at me and he said, he paid cash, and he bought 3 quilts that night.
Oh, wow.
For a lot. That's the most I've ever, I think
that's a great husband. That was one hell of a birthday she had.
Yeah. $1,000 a quilt. Yeah. I mean, this is, the old times were a lot higher prices on quilts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of our research has shown us that I guess the 80s and 90s were very different than kind of what collecting today looks like. So, yeah.
We got a couple of comments for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just hadn't said hello to anyone because I didn't want to disrupt anything we're talking about. My partner Sunday is in the chat. He was first one through the gate. Jan said hello and she was very excited for your interview. Susie Jerome is with us as well. Arlene came in and said hi, and then she was, as you were talking, she commented that she remembers fondly the times of the late 60s into the 70s. And Jan just commented, thank you for being part of the women's movement.
We appreciate the shoulders we stand upon.
It's pretty amazing.
So I know we want to get to some of the things that I know you wanted to talk about, like Viola's interview. But real quick, I wanna settle the my prophecy that because I have often heard this, and I didn't know how true it was, that in writing, folks writing books like you have that are really focused on history, the history of quilts, not how to make them, but the publishers like to have that option to just slip some patterns in there.
Right.
So was I correct? Rutledge Hill wanted that?
You really were. I mean, I laughed when you said that. I grabbed Jerry. I said, come in here. He remembers what happened that night because this thing was all done. The book was done. I mean, there's so much to this. Coordinating the pictures, looking at the color, everything, And then they said, it would really be we'd probably sell more books if you put patterns in it. I thought, oh, come on. And I remember Barbara saying the same, and Beth saying the same thing, come on. I said, well, let's try it. And so I decided, and they're, like you said, they are, I can't imagine anybody making a quilt using this, but, so we started with and these are quilts from the book. Swing in the Center is a Laura Wheeler pattern. And this Cross Tulips is a Ladies Art pattern. And this this New York Beauty one that ended up, it's not called New York Beauty. It ended up on the cover of the book. And then the last one was something from Nancy Page, a single column. It's not a series one. It's called I can't remember Bullseye. It's called
Bullseye.
Yeah.
And somebody very close to you drafted those patterns or drafted those images?
My husband, Jerry, he's a draftsman. And he said, yes, I can do that, and so there they are. And I mean, and then I went back and I looked at some of the books at the time, and that's really how they were it was kind of before rotary cutting, strip cutting. And so the book really, I don't think anybody made a quilt from this at all. And what was I thinking? Were they going to trace it and then transfer it? I don't know. I decided it wasn't my problem. And I don't think we did sell a lot of copies. I think, I don't know, 10,000, maybe. I can't remember. I was going to get those figures because we were selling a lot of books. Rutledge Hill had a very, very good reputation. And you've already done the one that AQSG did. Yeah. And I was in charge of that. I was on the publications committee of AQSG, and I had a great link to Rutledge Hill. And of course they said yes. And the Ohio book is Rutledge Hill. Nancy Lou Burdick's is Rutledge Hill. Betts was really kind of I don't think she ever got paid for it, but she definitely was an agent and really talking it up with state quilt projects and individual authors who wanted to write books to seek out Rutledge Hill. So anyway.
That's awesome. I didn't know that Betts had a hand in that too, with promoting them.
She's a very good instigator, motivator.
We like that. We love that.
I know.
So do you want to talk about the, Viola? I know that.
Well, I think I always thought that this would be fun to read out loud with two people, but I love to hear your voice is really good, Stephanie. I don't know. We haven't practiced this, but
we can wing this.
Hey,
Okay.
I told Stephanie that you might do all the voices yourself.
Well, I did plan on it, but well, let's try it. So why don't I'm going to be Mary Kay and you're going to be Viola.
Okay,
Okay.
what page? So what page?
It's on page
69?
69. And I thought we'd just go to just the beginning of 71. And remember the reason, well, I'll read it. The introduction is pretty good. And I love what she said to me at the end. She said, you know, what I know of my experience, I'm glad to share it with you. In the 1930s, the Tennessee State Fair had a special category for articles made of recycled cotton sacks. Viola Webb, encouraged by her sister, entered her quilts made from dyed flour sacks. So it's a white sack dyed. The bag, sheet, the thread, and the dye probably cost less than $1. She won the first prize of $8 in 1934, 35, and 37. In some years, she also won second and third prizes. Her niece, Frances Whittemore, encouraged me to call Viola to set up an interview. Here she is. Oh, God. So one sunny, tears are going to come to my eyes. I had such a great day then. So one sunny spring day in 1989, I drove to her farm in Middle Tennessee. I live in East Tennessee. Though a mild stroke had restricted her sewing, she still enjoyed talking about her special quilts. Her story is similar to others, but it was so wide-ranging that I included here as an essay on traditional quilt making of the 1930s. So here we go. Viola, where did you get these sacks? Was there a mill nearby or a general store?
No, my sister got them from an institution for 10 cents a sack, and they were over a yard. They were 100-pound flour sacks, and they were about 40 inches long.
So she worked there?
No, her husband was a physician there for a long time. She could buy the sacks for 10 cents. They had gone through the laundry, but they weren't in too good shape. So I washed them a time or two when I got them, and I used a rub board. I sure did. That was rough sailing too.
Did you have to work hard to get the printing out, the trademark out of the sacks?
Oh yeah, sometimes I could bleach it out, sometimes I cut it out, sometimes I try to get it out. I'm sorry. I try to get it out somehow. I first dyed the sacks and then I cut them in strips. Here's a bag. I did that years ago. I did that in the early 30s. I've straightened it, you see.
You straightened it? How did you do that?
I pulled a thread to find the grain and then I cut it straight and I dyed them.
What kind of dye did you use?
It was Putnam dye, best I could remember. I would boil it out in a kettle well. I just boil all the dye into the material I could, and then I put a lot of salt in the water, and then boil them again until the water's almost clear. So that put the dye into the material. Then I would take my quilt pattern, cut it out, and piece it.
So the backing was also sacks?
Oh, yes, it was sacks too. It wasn't dyed. The lining wasn't dyed. The cotton inside these quilts was raised on this farm. I made bats with cotton cards, and they're all padded with bats that I carded.
Whoa. You were glad to hear that, weren't you?
Uh-huh.
I've I've talked to people about making cotton bats. How did you do it?
You've seen cotton cards, haven't you? Well,
Yeah.
instead of making cotton rolls, you make cotton out flat in little bats. I would bake just chairfuls and I prepare to stretch the lining. My frames were hanging from the ceiling. I'd stretch the lining and baste it out onto the frames, which had a lot of holes in them. Then I'd place my bats on the lining and put the quilt top on top of it. Then I would baste the top so the lining all around the edges of the frame, and then I was ready to quilt.
Tell me about that basting. Did you take big stitches that would go all the way across the quilt or just around the edge?
Well, just around the edges because it was stretched tight. The top and bottom too was stretched tight on there too. And then with the darning needle, I'd baste it with the string that came out of the sacks. Instead of pinning it, I used basting thread. I used thread because the pins would get in the way of my arm.
Whoa. So you liked using the sacks. They quilted nice.
They quilted good, and also those bats. None of these quilts had any of those battings you could buy. They're all cotton.
They look really nice and thin.
Well, you could put those bats double and make a heavy quilt, but I didn't like that. Now here's the quilt. It's made of sacks, but it's heavier. If I'd had a big family, there wouldn't be a string of these quilts, but I only had one son, so that's how I was able to keep these quilts. Here's some flour sacks I bought years ago.
And there's the word string.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Oh, wait. Now, these pretty printed flour sacks, tell me about them.
Mm-hmm. I used to make aprons out of them, but when people got their houses burned, I'd give them away.
Now, where would you have gotten these sacks?
At the country store.
Here's a paisley one. And I have a picture of it.
Sometimes I'd have two just alike.
Boy, they look different from the ones in East Tennessee. I just wonder where they came from. You don't have any that still have the labels on them.
No, they've all been laundered. So here's one that's not been raveled out. It's got a chain stitch along the seam. It's easy to pull out.
Okay. And then we jump down and start talking about the quilts. And the one we're going to talk about is the pink and white one real quick. Tell me about these quilts that won ribbons. This pink and white one, the Drunkard's Path. Did it win a ribbon?
Yes, now it's faded more than any one I have. It will eventually fade. That dye will. Red worse to fade than blue.
But, I like the way it's fading. What color was it?
It wasn't this.
So where did you get the pattern Drunkard's Path?
I can't tell you. I might have cut it myself. Now this is easy to cut, but this piece needs to be a little bigger and a seam allowance has to be added. I had a picture. I could see how it was set together. You have to be careful how you place those blocks. Now, what was she pointing to? Was she pointing to like the curved?
Yes. Right. So anyway, should we keep on going? Or I think that's probably enough, except that I love where she says on the last page, on page 71. Well, we could start at the bottom of the first column. So you basically got your patterns when you saw a quilt. She's talking about where she's getting her patterns. And I'm saying, so when you saw a quilt, that's how you got your pattern. And she says, page 73.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, you could buy anything, groceries, hardware, and dress material. They just had big bolts. They called it brown domestic. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. Did you have to wash it before you put it in a quilt?
Nope.
Now the basket, that's the next one, doesn't look like it's been used or washed. You want to, yeah, there you go. Go ahead.
No, except the sacks have been washed.
The quilting on this is beautiful.
This is a little different from the others.
Let's go to the next one. The blue ribbon says September 16th, 1935. It's a basket. Oops. It's got, whoops, let's go back. Yeah. There we go. There. Yeah. It's all sacks also.
Yes, and I didn't have any pattern for this. I just looked at a picture and see, I knew this handle had to be bias, and that's what you call feather quilting.
So you basically got your patterns when you saw a quilt?
When I saw a picture, I'd see it, and then I'd go to whittling on it.
Go to whittling on it. I like that.
Make me a pattern.
Okay, we can stop there. Thank you.
I loved it. She sounds like such a delightful lady. I think all of these ladies they sounded like they were so fun to talk to, and just she sounds like she's a little sassy, maybe.
Yeah. Yes.
It also helps bring some of this to life, Merikay, to literally hear you saying your words. I can almost, picture your enthusiasm in asking the questions and looking at the quilts, only because, Steph and I are kind of like living that kind of enthusiasm now. So it's like from that, me being me, I insert myself into other people's stories as if I'm experiencing them myself. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of like, I kind of get those like butterflies in your stomach as if you're like looking at someone's collection and asking all those questions for the first time. So that was really nice. Kate also made her comment. She's like, I love this.
You guys didn't know you were in for a little play.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, wait a minute. I'm
Shall
sorry.
we
I
talk
lost
about
my
the questions still? We only have 15 minutes left.
yeah, and don't forget we also have a drawing to do.
Yes.
Um, so let's see. Where let me scroll through here. Sorry. I think what if this is okay with you, the Jill is very interested in hearing your response to the questions that you posed at the end of the book,
Yes.
which I think we read.
Mhm.
Um, we read
Mhm.
that piece. What's
Mhm.
been answered and what is still out there as like we don't know? Um,
Yeah. Well, I think you asked where the Anor quilts are.
mhm,
And see, when I wrote the book, we knew Anor was a big deal in Tennessee, but not, she was dead. She died in 1940. And there were a lot of people in Nashville who were in her circle and even worked for her. And it was just a story that somebody needed to go and do. And a lot of people had passed away even before I got there. But I did meet the grandson who owned what was left of the Orr studio, which was pretty amazing. So he had samples and photos and things like that. So that's why I went ahead and wrote the article in Uncoverings on Ann
mhm.
Orr. And then Bets and I did an exhibit. Oh, we had so much fun with
Yeah,
hats
I was gonna ask about that.
and
So where did that exhibit take place? You just said it was in Nashville.
Travelers Rest is a historic home in Nashville,
Okay.
and uh, they and Betts often was doing exhibits about once a year there, and we did one on Civil War quilts there too. But one time we decided that we were going to do Ann Orr, and so we called all these people who said they were friends of Ann Orr, and they said, "Oh, my niece or my granddaughter has," and oh, it was a. I'll send you some pictures. We had probably 20 quilts on display, and oh, it was lovely.
Oh wow.
But so small, and it didn't get a lot of attention, but we had a lot of fun. And where is the grand prize winning quilt of the Sears Quilt Contest? Well, um, we still don't know. Um, what is kind of exciting right now is that with newspapers.com,
Mhm.
it's a lot easier to find articles about other entries in all over the country because Sears really did a bang up job with publicity. And I have another friend, she might be on here tonight, who is she's looking good. She's earning her her gold stars. She's found two of the quilts we've been looking for a long time. So this is fun. I like to share it with people, and the search is a great adventure, and she has found some really interesting stories on the side. People and newspapers.com and all the digitized newspapers now are really a great addition and really help people doing quilt research that was not available when I was there. I think it's interesting too that it was hard to get birth and death dates of women and
Yes, yes,
and
because it's
genealogy back then. It was
yeah.
all before ancestry.com.
Mhm.
And so if anybody watching and has the book would like to just, it'd be kind of a cool little project to go look at every one of those women and uh, see their genealogy, look them up in the newspaper. You might find some interesting extra stories about them. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always feel like I feel like we have this great gift of having newspapers.com now. I always feel like I'm cheating sometimes because it is such a wonderful thing to be able to find information and also break down those barriers of women who were only known as, Mrs. John Smith. Like we
mhm.
never, hardly ever knew their first name and certainly, nothing about their birth and death dates. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if I could ask you one question that's a little off topic of the book, but very interesting. You've mentioned already, like you mentioned Lindsay at one point. So I wanted to ask for everyone else here, what are your other research interests besides the topic of this book?
Well, I continue. I did a lot of research on chintz center medallion quilts from the South that use these printed center panels.
And I may have heard your lecture about it, and it was very awesome.
And they were also made in England, and there are lots of people who are interested in them for the chintz, for this, that. And I found myself trying to kind of rein myself in and keep what I was most interested in was these quilts from the South. You hear me say this a lot. I really do feel like there's a untold story in the South, and a lot of untold stories. And I just think we ought to tell them, and we ought to, I encourage people to look because it's pretty exciting. So the other one I love looking at when somebody puts out a quilt and says, what's the pattern? They always go to an index, either Brackman or Jenny Byers or some of the other ones. And what they get is, an illustration and a number and a name. Sometimes there's dates on them. Jenny Byer did something pretty cool because she does have dates of when all the newspaper patterns appeared. So if you've got that, whoa, I grabbed that, and I often will think, well, okay, 1934. So then I go to newspapers.com and I put the name of the pattern in and that date, and oh boy, lots of examples come up. And then I take a little picture, a little thing like this, and copy it and save it. And then I also download the photo of the quilt. If somebody's looking for one, I'd say, here's a real quilt made out of this pattern. I put the little newspaper thing next to it. That's just something I do on the side. I think that's kind of fun. Kits and patterns. But honestly, I'm getting a little older, and it's hard to do these things. I love doing them, but it's hard. I really encourage younger people to get into it and not be afraid to, I remember Bets and I felt like we had to get certain people to give us their, certificate of, it's okay, you go with this. Do the whole state of Tennessee. There was a woman in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, who thought, everybody thought, maybe she didn't think so, that she was the grande dame of quilts in Tennessee. And you couldn't do a quilt survey without consulting her. We did consult her. And she said, oh, go for it. And that's kind of like I do too. Go for it. Do it. You're going to find something new. Janneke Smucker's book has just come out, and I just feel like I feel so thrilled about this. And I know what went into it. I know it. And, people say, well, that's Mary Kay's topic. No, it's not Mary Kay's topic. She went way beyond. Yes, I gave her a lot of stuff and gave her lots of ideas, but this is a fabulous book. A really good edition. Yeah.
Janneke's a powerhouse.
She is. And I remember when she was a first-year graduate student at University of Nebraska. And she just, she's worked hard, and she's got a good heart. And I feel honored that she kind of picked it up and went with it and got it published. So.
That one, I'm sure, is going to be on our list sooner rather than later, because Stephanie's already brought it up like 3 separate times.
Yeah, I snagged it as soon as it was available. I knew she'd been working on the book, and as soon as they, was it Westchester that published it? As soon as it was available to purchase, I was like, it's mine. And of course, my mom was mad because she wanted to buy it for me for my birthday or Christmas or whatever. I was like, no, couldn't wait.
Another thing one of the other questions you asked about was who are or I asked, was who are the unattributed artists for some of these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And that did become kind of a research focus after this book was published. I wondered, who, the business, like Jill, you were saying, how did this happen? Who were the quilt entrepreneurs? I was curious about Anna Orr, and that here she was working for Good Housekeeping magazine and being based in Nashville, and honestly didn't put a stitch in anything either. She's the designer, she's the thought person. Well, anyway, one day, these Mountain Mist, oh my gosh, be sure to look for that article I wrote about Mountain Mist, also in Uncoverings. That was my good old husband too, who Jerry, he was here. I was in California at an AQSG meeting, and some woman called and said, I am the niece of Margaret Hayes. She worked for Mountain Mist. She has passed away. I have all this stuff. Do you think Mary Kay would want it? And Jerry said, yes. Yes. So, and I mean, it was incredible. He called me. I said, this can't be true. And I called her directly. And I mean, it was amazing what the family had. And it has correspondence between the artist, Margaret Hayes, and Mr. Hooker at Mountain Mist. And this is at the time when it's just 28, 29, when they've decided that in order to sell more batting, they need to put patterns, make patterns and put them on the wrapper. This is soft covers for hard times. This is prior to this, it was brown paper, on these balls of these rolls of batting. And then the Sears contest too. I mean, they were having that contest to sell more fabric. It was pure advertising, and in fact, Sue Roberts comes from the advertising department, and they broadcast over the radio. This is why, well, we didn't talk about the name Soft Covers for Hard Times. All along, I was going to call it a cover for hard times. Because, but and Roby Cogswell was the state folklorist, and I asked him to do the introduction, and he had lived in Kentucky, and he knew about the Caden quilt, and he on his own went out and did some things, and he went ahead of me to check to see if people were going to get upset about revealing that this was a bit of a scandal. And they all said, don't worry about it. Everybody knew about Miss Caden. It's an old story. But he is the one who he suggested soft covers for hard times. And I think the parallelism is perfect. He's a musician by trade. And it's just been great. And it's funny how people, when they talk about the 30s now, they kind of get in this corner where all they can say is that the quilts are soft covers for hard times. And I've had more than one person ask me for permission to use that title. I said, I don't think it's mine, but okay, I give you permission. It's so authentic. It was just a perfect name. And I feel really proud of this book. And
you should be.
It's dated a bit, but it's been fun to go back and look at it. So.
Oh, I don't think it's dated at all. I think it is an evergreen content. And, I mean, that's why we wanted to do it. And we were, of course, so thrilled and honored that you wanted to indulge us and revisit, and it has been a minute since you published this. And, I mean, lots of other books came after it. So, this I feel like was kind of your tour de force. And then, you did a whole bunch of other projects. So we're pretty proud that we know you.
I think it's important too, because you mentioned Yannicken's book, which I haven't gone through yet, but have heard raves about. And I think it's important to make sure that we visit this early research because, jumping, let's say, right into Yannicken's book, we might miss some of this, you know, initial work that had been done before the internet, before newspapers.com and Ancestry and things like that, because I feel like in moving certain things onto the internet and those other platforms, we've lost some things. It's always bound to happen when you're making those big moves. So I feel like, you know, it is really important to always kind of look at like this, you know, you said dated, this older research to make sure that we're getting some of that initial legwork that had been done, which at the time doing this kind of research is that's hefty research to do. It's not easy to go like anthropologically and interview and things like that. That's heavy, especially when you said looking at it now, like you might get kind of teary-eyed, like there's emotion and things into that isn't, it's not that it's not there now, it's just different. So I feel really privileged to look at this now and talk about it now before maybe reading the next generation of research, which would be Janniken's book.
Yeah.
And, you know, to that point, immediately after this book came out, as often happens, people ask me to come give talks. And I went to Birmingham, Alabama, to a quilt guild. And at this point, I'm saying things like, and I ended the slide talk and I said, and now I want to say, save the quilt, save the story, but save the paper. This is our archaeology. Someone came up to me afterwards and said, that was interesting what you said, because our church has just been given this collection of quilt stuff. We want you to see it. And I said, oh, that's okay. That's okay. You do it. She said, it's a lot of stuff. I said, well, maybe. And so I was staying overnight and I'd driven down I had a Mazda, you know, little sports car, just not a lot of room for stuff. And I had to be back. I was being given an honor that night or something. I had to go fast. So I said, okay, we're going and we're going to look. And we went inside in the basement, opened the door, and oh my gosh. I mean, the basement of this little country church was filled with everything you can imagine. Mountain mist patterns, Hirschner's kits. I mean, in one corner, they pulled out all the hardback books. It was 4 feet high. It was as high as my shoulder. And I just scanned it. It had Dutton in it. It had Webster. It had Finley. And I just was so overcome. I immediately said this price. I mean, I was just looking at the books and I just said, it was a 4-figure amount. I never say, but it was a lot of money. And the women, there was one woman on the floor. Oh my God. And they're going through black garbage bags, putting stuff in garbage bags and taking it out in the hallway. And to kind of get in order, they're going to have a rummage sale. And this woman on the floor raises up her hand and she says, oh, the Lord is in this room. The Lord is in this room. And they were like, really? You're going to give that much money for this? And I said, yes. And you bring all those things in the hallway inside, out there inside. We're locking the door. I'm taking the books and I'll be back tomorrow. It took me
something bigger than a Mazda.
4 pickup loads.
Wow.
Oh, because you stayed in the Mazda. You didn't.
I just put the books in the Mazda and then came back the next day. 3 more pickup loads. It's still in my house. It still drives us crazy. But that is the Mildred Dickerson collection. And she was part of the round robin group of people nationwide. Just what you said, Jill, is what, you know, I had no idea that was going on. That it was a huge network of research and archiving. And it was so grassroots. And
when we read about that, in which book was that stuff that we were reading about?
Well, it's in one of the Uncoverings books. Well,
I think it was.
Mary Schaefer was
yes,
part of
that's it. We were reading about that, and Steph and I both were like, it's hard to
Yeah.
even really picture what
Yeah.
something like that used to be like in like snail
Mhm.
mail terms.
Right.
Yeah. And then
It's
Questa Benberry, I know you pointed that
yes,
stuff
and
out to me,
Questa
and I've
was
read
in
her
it.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you got to honor the past and realize that you're not the know-it-all.
Our
There are
Arlene
people. Yeah.
Arlene just made a comment that like it's such a great way to document and record these women and their quilts. And yes, this is history, and there's lots of artifacts if you look. And to that, since you still have that like really big collection, Stephanie and I are happy to come over and look at it.
Okay. Someday.
Yeah,
Someday.
I've been poking Barbara Brackman. She made
Yeah.
an offhand comment, and I was like, hmm.
Mhm.
So what is your address, Barbara? You never know
Well,
when Jill
I
or
mean,
Stephanie might show up.
right. And the days are numbered. There's no question about it. It's hard to say take it because it's like having your own library in the house.
Mhm,
And,
mhm.
um, to go downstairs where it is and pull out something and you think, oh my gosh, it didn't make sense 10 years ago, but now somebody's asking about it. And you put
Mhm.
things together. That New Jersey, the museum, is a case in point recently. And it was a bigger deal a few years ago, and it was in a lot of magazines. I wonder if the current curator knows all that.
Mm, mm.
But anyway, so it's let's hear it for quilt research.
Absolutely. And
we're
I
not
mean,
Yeah.
we're not
And
saving the world, but we're saving a story.
yeah, but we're saving important stories about the world. And I think
yeah.
that, we're bound and destined to repeat our mistakes if we don't look in the rearview mirror occasionally and, pay attention to what happened in the past. So I think, you talking about kind of having found your people when you discovered quilts, Jill and I definitely, when we,
Yeah.
both of us have made quilts, both of us love quilts, but I feel like both of us, when we really got to know people like you, we were like, oh my gosh, where have you been all my life? Why, why
Yeah.
haven't we been friends forever? Because you are our people.
That's right.
So yeah, we know that feeling.
Well, that and just
So
the last uplifting of, it's not like we're saving the world, but I feel like on one hand, this is gonna sound really cheesy, but I'm gonna go for it. I feel like we're saving women because like your interviews in here, Mary Kay, that you have typed out, who would have cared about that? Everyone would have been like, it's just some lady and her like fabric in her room, and it's like her words are immortalized now
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you went and you did that. And
yeah,
like I think that's a really big, I've got goosebumps, that's really powerful in a way that
yeah.
I think people didn't realize in that moment that we're finally starting to realize now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask about how people would publish things, think close, there's got to be people like that in everybody's little place they live. There's got to be special stories. Record them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, collect them. You don't have to publish them today. You can
No,
collect them,
that's
and
right.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, Cult Alliance is doing that too, with the oral history, and yeah, I think these are really important things for sure. Yeah. So, yeah, Jan just said women's history is history, so overlooked. Absolutely. Yeah. So, with that said, there was one book I wanted to mention, and I think it's because of you that I know about this book. If you want to read more about this era and kind of outside of Tennessee, is this book,
yeah.
which is Useful Work for Unskilled Women. And this is specifically about the Milwaukee WPA project, and it's by Mary Kellogg Rice. And we'll post it in the Facebook group so that you'll have the information about it. But it's one that, having heard Mary Kay talk about some of these things before, and then I found out about this book, and then I was able to put together a bunch of information, that kind of disparate pieces that I'm like, it all kind of like, it struck me in the head. So, yeah,
I got to meet her in California every time I went to the board meeting or a seminar, it used to be out in California, and we'd make a special, I'd stay overnight with her on the way up to San Rafael. I remember that she, and then at Point Bonita, I'd go there with Joyce Gross, and Mary said, "I'm going to live to 100 because I want to vote for Mr. Obama." And she made it. She lived long enough. Yes.
To vote.
It was so cool. She was a incredible woman. And the chance to meet that one, and it was only through that sailboat quilt that I found that she was and her husband, oh my gosh, he was a China expert. It's just been wonderful. So, and then she wrote that book late in life and paid for the entire thing, all the photography, because I always thought it was because she didn't think I did a good enough job on it. Well, and I was only interested in the quilt part. It's a much bigger story. And that book is, I think, just excellent. And
it really is. And
it doesn't get a lot.
There's more than the quilt.
Right. Yes. It's a really interesting project that kind of became a model for the WPA. And no town went to that extent to create a WPA handicraft based project anywhere in the country. They might have done just sewing, they might have done woodworking, and then of course there are all these men's jobs building bridges and cabins and things like that. But no, it's a really unique project. So
yeah, there's so I mean, I just feel like there's so much still to look at and to come out of that era, even though we've lost, well, I mean, essentially we've lost everybody that was making quilts at that time. And people that were alive at that time are quickly leaving us. But yeah, I still feel like there's so much more. And Janniken's book being a perfect example that she was able, standing on your shoulders and Mary's shoulders to, then put together what she put together, which I'm still not done reading it, but I have definitely pored over all the pictures. So, yeah. Well, it is a bit after 8 and we want to be respectful of your time because I don't know if Jerry's just waiting. He's like, these girls, they're keeping you too late, Merikay.
No.
But we did want to do a little drawing. Merikay agreed to sign a book plate or two for our folks, and she will dedicate it to you, and you can put it in your soft covers book. So in order to get the my little random number generator, I actually did the drawing before.
Okay.
So I would like to announce that our two winners are our friend Janet, and I'm not saying last names here because I'm trying to be, protect people's privacy, but our friend Janet B, you know who you are. And the other winner is Molly, our friend Molly.
Wow.
So,
Yay.
Now, if either of those two doesn't have a copy, I'll donate.
Okay. Well, we'll check with them. They better have a copy because they've been reading along.
Oh, okay. But if they don't,
but yes, we will check with them just in case. But yeah, I'll get all of the stuff put together.
I'll mail it out. So
yeah, we'll get everything together with addresses and stuff.
One of the interesting things about 30 years, these books come around, and so here's one I got at I don't know where I got it, secondhand somewhere, and it says, "To Cynthia, it's signed by me, a big fan. Thank you, Merikay Waldvogel, 2007. I mean, and then I'll just put below it, it keeps going. It's kind of a little timeline. One I found, I don't think I have it here. Ruth Bond bought several copies for her family, and so it says something like, in tribute to Ruth Bond, signed by Merikay Waldvogel. Somebody got that book online, a friend of mine in my sewing group. And because she had some kind of, hers was destroyed in a flood kind of situation. So I gave her another one, and she gave me the one that said Ruth Bond on it. It's kind of fun to collect.
It is pretty funny to find these on the secondary market, because your and Barbara's book, the Patchwork Souvenirs book, has a book plate in it that you and Barbara signed, and then it has a dedication. And I want to ask, I'll ask you later on about it and show it to you. But I don't know. It kind of made me think that the person it was given to may have some connection to a quilt in that book.
Okay.
So yeah,
what happened with that one is, I think that book came out after the first exhibit, and so we had to give out book plates just like you're doing tonight. And we have them made. Not every one of them have those book plates in them. And so we would, they'd give us the money, we gave them a book plate, and when the books came out, we'd send it to them or something like that. But
yeah, I think a lot of authors do that now, because it is people buy stuff from Amazon, and it becomes difficult. You're not sitting there distributing your own books anymore, or doing readings at bookstores. So yeah, we have to get creative, and we appreciate your willingness.
There's really a difference in the quilt world too, because we were really on the road a lot. That 90s period, maybe early. Oh my gosh, I'd be traveling 2 or 3 times a month on a plane. I quit teaching after this book came out, because I basically had another career. I wasn't making a lot of money from it, but I needed to focus on that. I couldn't just be accepting talks, or when I had to be teaching 3 days a week. And each one of these books had exhibits. So the whole group of quilts would go someplace. And so, we were expected to go and do a curator's talk or something. Sometimes, I say when it was with Patchwork Souvenirs, sometimes Barbara would go, sometimes I would go. And with Bets, it was the same thing. Sometimes we'd split it. So there was a lot of moving around. And then you get all these museums asking you to do more exhibits, or a museum in Michigan said, we want to do a quilt exhibit like the Sears Quilt Contest, and we want you to judge it. So Barbara and I went up there, and it was hard. It was real. They had the people, they gave a theme, and the people entered their quilts, and it was hard to judge. And it kind of gave us all a sense of, how do you judge a quilt show with a theme like that? You're looking for the best quilts or inspirational quilts, or I remember the one was a really collagey thing that both of us loved, but I'm not sure which one we chose. But anyway, it was
the moral of the story is, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
It was a high time to be in quilt research then. So
I was going to say, the moral of the story is research some stuff. You build it, they will come, and they want you to talk about it everywhere.
Yeah.
And even 30 years later.
I think there are museums that are looking for quilt shows. I really think somebody could it's hard, but I think they could try 2 or 3 kinds of, putting group quilts together and then sending them out to museums. And if the museums like them, they'll want them again the next year. I was saying that Mary Kerr did that in a really successful way with Southern quilts. And I'm surprised she didn't try it again, because I think it really is a model that could work. It just takes a lot of work. And
yeah, I never got to see any of those quilts, but I did hear that how she had done that.
Yeah. Anyway, well, it's been fun. I've got to tell you.
Thank you so much for telling us about it and being here with us. Like it's so great to be able to have people that we admire and hold in such a high regard, willing to sit here and spend time with us. Like we can't tell you how much we gush over our quilt history friends that are so supportive of us and things that we're doing, and want to be here with us. Like it's a really big deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't
we
mean to like
definitely feel lucky.
fangirl like or anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, Merikay, Merikay is very humble, but she gets a lot of fangirls. So
yeah. But you two are really, really, I really appreciate everything you do too. So
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jan says so wonderful to hear these stories, and she thanks you a lot.
Okay.
Well, we will let you get on with your evening. Thank you so much again. And I'll be in touch with you to wrap up all of the details.
All right.
So we guys, again, thank you for, I think this, again, concurrent viewers look pretty high. So Merikay gives us street cred.
Good,
so thank you
good.
to everybody who came and to support us. And we so appreciate it. So we will say goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.